747 crash. Korean Air Jumbo explodes near Stansted. Airline safety record under scrutiny, the latest in a long line. Neil Hamilton speaks tonight. What I think about Al-Fayed. Appeals for coffins as death toll rises in Venezuela.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. A Boeing 747 crashed in a huge fireball soon after it took off from Stansted Airport in Essex tonight. It was a cargo plane operated by Korean Air and mercifully had only 4 people on board. They were killed, but no one on the ground was hurt. The crash rattled the windows of the main airport terminal. The jet came down in a wood just outside Stansted Airport, narrowly missing 2 busy roads. It crashed just half a mile from the A120 and a mile from the M11 motorway. Harry Smith reports.
The fires were still burning long after the plane came down in a wood just beyond the airport runway. A police helicopter was among the first of the emergency services on the scene, searching in vain for survivors. The wreckage was scattered over a wide area and firefighters had to deal with several ground fires. The plane, which had just taken off, was fully loaded and the air around the crash scene was thick with the smell of burning aviation fuel. Police say they're also concerned about the plane's cargo.
But there is a suggestion that this may be possibly paint or possibly flammable cargo, so clearly there's also a public safety issue here in terms of perhaps a fire and perhaps chemicals.
Eyewitnesses described it as a huge fireball.
We all rushed outside, saw this glow, colossal glow in the sky, and in fact felt the heat from the burning aircraft a quarter of a mile away from us.
All I saw from the motorway was a column of orange flame leaping straight up into the air. It must have been a fairly hard hit, yeah.
It's thought the plane hit a power line as it ploughed into the wood, leaving a number of homes in the area without electricity. Stansted's runway has been closed all evening, with thousands of passengers stranded as flights are diverted to other airports. This family were on the plane behind the Korean aircraft, waiting their turn to take off.
The one on the right-hand side of the plane just looked, and the left-hand side of the plane, and a fireball just went up. And that's all we could really see, and then like all the fire engines and stuff.
The airport runway is expected to remain closed for some time yet. Meanwhile, air accident investigators are already examining the wreckage as they begin their effort to find out what caused this crash. Harry Smith, ITN, Stansted Airport.
The Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott is going to Stansted in the morning. He'll meet officials from the Air Accident Investigation Board as they start establishing what caused this crash. Korean Air, it has to be said, has a bad safety record. Here's Neil Connery.
In 1997, a Korean Air Jumbo crashed on the Pacific island of Guam, killing 226 people. Over the past 20 years, more than 700 people have been killed on their flights. A number of airlines suspended cross-company deals after a Korean Air Cargo 747 crashed in Shanghai in April. A leaked internal report alleged an authoritarian cockpit culture, inadequate English and pilot error were compromising safety.
We've seen from previous accidents that the problems on takeoff usually come from crew management, that somebody retracts the flaps or the slats too quickly, or they don't put the right power settings in, and that there's a problem on the flight deck rather than a problem with the aircraft, say, or with the weather. And I think that's where we should be looking in this case.
Korean Air is the world's second biggest cargo airline. Its Stansted freight operation had only begun a few months ago. Crash investigators will concentrate their efforts on establishing the sequence of events before, during and after takeoff. The key to unravelling what went wrong will lie in the cargo plane's cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorders. Stansted Airport has expanded rapidly with freight and passenger services over the past decade. It's the third largest UK airport for freight, dealing with more than 200,000 metric tons. Given the early evening takeoff time and the fact the cargo plane's fuel tanks would have been full, the crash could have resulted in an even greater loss of life. Neil Connery, ITN.
Well, back now to Harry Smith at Stansted. Harry, are there any initial theories there as to what went wrong?
Well, I can tell you, I've just been told a few minutes ago that the air accident investigators have found one of the aircraft's black boxes, the flight recorders. We believe it's the cockpit voice recorder. Now that, of course, could be vital in giving them clues. It would tell them what conversations were going on between the pilot and co-pilot, or between the pilot and the control tower in the last moments of the flight, and that might give them a clue as to what went wrong. I've spoken to a number of eyewitnesses around here who've told me that there was strange engine noises coming from the aircraft just before it hit the ground. Now, these are people who live on an airport flight path. They're used to engine noises, and they all said they didn't recognise this as one they'd heard before. There was definitely something strange that may point to engine failure, but of course it will be some time yet before we have that confirmed.
And Harry, clearly with a plane this size falling out of the sky, it could have been a lot worse.
It could indeed. Tragically, there appear to be 4 dead on the plane. No casualties at all on the ground. We're not completely sure just how close it was to houses. There's no big centre of population in the wooded area where it came down. It's a well-known nature reserve locally. But there were farmhouses, there were houses within sight of it, we believe. So yes, it could have been a great deal worse.
Harry Smith at Stansted, thanks a lot. The disgraced former Conservative Minister Neil Hamilton went home to his old Cheshire constituency tonight after his disastrous failed libel action against Mohammed Al-Fayed. He said he and his wife had taken a lot of knocks, but told ITN's Colin Baker he hoped they wouldn't have to sell the house.
This may be the last Christmas the Hamiltons spend in their Cheshire home. It may have to be sold to pay massive legal fees.
2 minutes to open up and take the odd thing in, and then you're welcome, OK?
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Sorry about the rain.
Clearly, the pair were in a more relaxed mood than when they left London 4 hours earlier. Friends and supporters had gathered inside the £700,000 house, and it was here the former MP talked openly to me for the first time since yesterday's grim defeat in the High Court.
Could we just put to you the latest Al-Fayed statement which came this evening?
No, I'm not going to make any comments on the case itself, I think, but well, you can tell me what he said. But
what he said was, when it was put to him about your financial situation, he said that you should suffer.
I see. Well, there we are. That tells you more about Mr. Fayed than we need to know, I think.
And happy Christmas to you all, too.
It is the season of goodwill, and we, I think, take a rather different attitude towards people's misfortunes compared with Mr. Fayed. I think we demonstrated during the course of the trial his natural vindictiveness, and he's nothing if not consistent.
Is he correct, though? Are you suffering?
Well, of course, it hasn't been a pleasant experience. It goes without saying, doesn't it? But anyway, we're delighted to be home amongst our friends.
Somebody's left a Christmas cake in
neighbours.
the port. I don't know who's done it yet, but it looks jolly good.
Mr. Hamilton said he'll decide whether or not to appeal after Christmas. And when I asked him about his financial backers, he said many of them were unknown to him.
The fund itself is confidential, and I've not been told who the contributors are. Some have made their identities public in newspapers and so on, but beyond that, I deliberately didn't want to know, because I didn't want anybody to feel under any moral pressure to contribute, because if I found out that they hadn't, they might feel that I would be aggrieved. So everybody has contributed quite voluntarily, and the overwhelming majority, I'm sure, are wholly unknown to me.
Would they have to sell the house?
I hope not, but we must wait and see. And it's far too early to contemplate the full consequences of this week's verdict. But we're resilient by nature. We've taken a lot of knocks in the last 5 years, but we've got a lot of very good friends and supporters, and we've had wonderful support from our family.
Can you say
so we've come home to where we belong.
What do you have to look forward to now, this time of year?
A wonderful, happy family Christmas.
Exactly.
Today, dressed as Father Christmas, but with about as much goodwill for Mr. Hamilton as a jilted partner, Mohammed Al-Fayed gave out brown envelope presents to shoppers in Harrods.
People who trusted him, who voted for him, he lets all those people down. You think a person like that need any sympathy? He will have no sympathy for nobody, I'm sure.
For the Hamiltons now, they have a tree to buy, a house to decorate and a festival to celebrate. But the bitterness between two former friends would not be hidden by Christmas glitter. Colin Baker, ITN, Cheshire.
And the supporters who raised a fighting fund for Mr Hamilton are now being pursued for similar shares of Mr Al-Fayed's legal costs as well. The man who organised the fund has declined to name them, though he referred to one today as Q. ITN cracked that particular riddle. Here's Caroline Kerr.
From his stately home in Hampshire, one of Mr Hamilton's backers, the man known mysteriously as Q, was tonight bracing himself for what might be a hefty legal bill. We can reveal that he's the Earl of Portsmouth, a hereditary peer whose first name is Quentin and who's sometimes known as Q among his friends. Other financial backers include Giles Brandreth, seen here on the left, who's a former Tory MP, and Norris McWhirter, the writer who used to run the Guinness Book of Records. The man who persuaded them to fund Neil Hamilton's case said he thought it wrong they should now have to pay his legal costs, and said he wouldn't reveal the identities of any others who wanted to remain anonymous.
Anonymously and privately, they put up money to enable Hamilton to have his chance in court. I'm not in the business of revealing their names if they do not wish their names to be revealed.
Neil Hamilton's main asset is his home in Cheshire. He said tonight he hoped he wouldn't have to sell it, but even if he does, it won't clear his debts. Mr Hamilton's supporters say that he now faces legal costs of about £2 million. The Hamiltons' assets include the fighting fund of around £500,000. Their Cheshire home is valued at £700,000 and their London flat at about £200,000. That amounts to £1,400,000, but it still leaves them £600,000 short. When Neil Hamilton emerged from this court yesterday afternoon, he knew that he faced financial ruin. Tonight, many of his former backers will be wondering how much it's now going to cost them for having supported him. Caroline Kerr, ITN, at the High Court.
Every convicted terrorist prisoner still in the Maze prison in Northern Ireland is being allowed home tomorrow for Christmas and the New Year. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Mandelson, said it was because of the remarkable political progress that's been made recently. Lauren Taylor reports.
The Maze prison holds some of Northern Ireland's most infamous convicted terrorists, but over the Christmas period, for the first time, all of them are being let out. Among those getting holiday parole are the IRA's James McArdle. It's less than 3 years since he took part in the Docklands bombing, which ended the IRA's ceasefire at the time. He was sentenced to 25 years in jail. Leading loyalist Michael Stone is another Maze inmate being allowed home for Christmas. He was jailed for the gun and grenade attack on mourners at an IRA funeral. The Northern Ireland Secretary said the decision was in recognition of the remarkable political progress over recent weeks and as a confidence-building measure. Today's moves have already angered some unionists, but it's clear that the government is keen to fulfil its undertakings under the Good Friday Agreement in the hope of increasing the pressure on the IRA to start decommissioning, which remains one of the most difficult hurdles in the peace process. Lauren Taylor, ITN, Westminster.
Officials in Venezuela appealed for coffins tonight, saying the country simply didn't have enough to bury the tens of thousands believed to have been killed in last week's floods. They're trying to get survivors to leave the devastated area for good. James Mates has the latest.
In a country where tens of thousands of people have nothing, it's difficult to prevent them stealing anything that's available. We found troops vainly shooting into the air to try and stop the looting of a shipping container. Some arrests have been made, but this is only one priority among many. The real battle is getting aid to areas where roads have almost ceased to exist. We found progress painfully slow. There is no way to get heavy vehicles through here. When we did reach the town of Makuto, we found most of the artifacts of modern life had been simply swept away. This was once the children's hospital, the wards hurriedly emptied at the height of the storm.
This is the nurses' reception desk here in this ward. You can see a box of medical supplies and things has been abandoned here. The level of mud is so high that I can barely stand upright in this room. But what really brings this home is that this is not the ground floor. There is an entire floor below us that has been completely filled with mud. What then happened was the water, the mud, the rocks came in through an upper story window here to half fill this level as well.
Only the roof still shows above the mud. There is no way to save buildings like these. Here, as in so many towns, they will have no option but to build again from scratch. No longer are the authorities searching for survivors here. The bulldozers are moving in. Whole areas are to be declared memorial grounds and never rebuilt.
The victims, forever uncounted, are to remain buried. James Mates, ITN, Venezuela.
Here, a family of 4 were killed today when a suspected gas explosion tore apart their bungalow. Their home in Lark Hall in Lanarkshire was left a pile of rubble after the blast. Emergency services discovered the bodies of Jeanette Finlay and her 2 children. A search for Mrs. Finlay's husband was called off tonight. There are reports tonight that Russian troops are under orders to go into the Chechen capital Grozny within days or even hours. The Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin promised that the end of the campaign was close, though that looked unlikely earlier today. Mark Webster reports on a war already claiming many lives.
Chechen fighters are still fully in command of Grozny, despite months of aerial and land bombardment by the Russians. Moscow's hopes that these militants would simply leave to escape the shelling have proved utterly unfounded. These pictures, smuggled out of Grozny today, show that Russian losses are mounting. And images of Russian prisoners paraded before the cameras may begin to provoke some doubts in Moscow about the conduct of this war. This appears to be the only answer Russia has. More heavy artillery moving into place in the open fields around Grozny. We found teams of young conscripts manning these batteries, which daily rain a deadly hail on the city. After so many weeks in the field, they looked a pathetic sight. They also appeared indifferent or unaware of the terrible effect their shelling has on the civilians still inside the Chechen capital. Though these tank gunners insist that their targets are carefully pre-selected, it's impossible even to see where their shells are landing. And the fact is that at the other end, in the city of Grozny, there are thousands of civilians sheltering in cellars, terrified in case the next bomb which lands hits them. Tonight the guns roared again as the offensive showed no signs of letting up. However, for all the firing, the Russians have failed to advance any deeper into the Chechen-held city for several days. Mark Webster, ITN, on the outskirts of Grozny.
Here, the government gave up today on the idea of trying to fit an athletics track into the new Wembley Stadium. It will now be kept as designed for football and rugby league only, and athletics will have to find a different home. The FA was ordered to repay £20 million of the lottery money it got for Wembley. That money will be ring-fenced for a new athletics venue. There have been 3 more FA Cup third-round replays tonight, and highlights are on ITV a bit later, so look away now if you don't want to know the results. Tonight's main headlines again. A Boeing 747 cargo plane of Korean Air crashed in a fireball near Stansted Airport in Essex tonight. 4 people on board, all Koreans, were killed. The airport is not expected to reopen before the morning. And Neil Hamilton and his wife went home to Cheshire for Christmas tonight after his disastrous libel action against Mohammed Al Fayed. Now to tonight's financial figures. And the FTSE 100 was up 21 points at the close. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose by just 3 points. And the pound closed just over 2/3 of a cent lower against the dollar. Now a look at tomorrow's papers. And the Guardian leads with the jumbo jet crash at Stansted. It says at least 4 crew died in the crash, but there are still no reports of people hurt on the ground. It also claims the people who funded Neil Hamilton's libel action will now defy the call to pay costs. The Mail says the crash was just a heartbeat from horror. Less than a mile either way, it says, and the result would have been too horrific to contemplate. The Sun also dedicates its front page to the crash. It says the plane skimmed rooftops near Stansted and narrowly missed 2 Essex villages. The Times leads with the claim that the Lord Chancellor, Lord Irvine, plans to stop people like Neil Hamilton building up huge fighting funds for libel cases. They picture Tony Blair, as we've never seen him before, with glasses. And the Independent claims that the Tory leader William Hague has dropped plans to purge pro-European MPs, so he wants to stop more MPs defecting to Labour. And that's the way it looks tonight. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow. Do join me again at 11 o'clock if you can. From the entire ITV Nightly News team here tonight, good night.
Good evening. Well, I've managed to stay dry from this particular puddle, but you may not be so lucky in the next few days. More heavy rain to come. Overnight, most of the rain becoming confined to East Anglia and the far southeast, elsewhere becoming somewhat dry. Still some wintry showers around exposed northwestern areas, but most places becoming dry, especially in the east. But a chilly one, temperatures close to freezing, some icy stretches to watch out for. So a cold start, but a bright and breezy one for most places. Some sunshine, especially in the east. There'll still be those showers further west, and through the morning the cloud will thicken up across many parts of Ireland, bringing really wet weather into Northern Ireland. Through the afternoon, some heavy and persistent bursts of rain. So too Western Scotland, Wales and the West Country. Those winds picking up to gale or even severe gale. Drier further east, but clouding up all the time. It's not going to feel all that warm anywhere. Temperatures generally in the range 7 to 10 Celsius, 10 in the far southwest, 50 Fahrenheit. Christmas Eve still very unsettled, a lot of rain in the south, strong winds too, brighter for a time further north.
Power Gen. Power, whatever the weather.
Good evening. Stansted Airport remains closed tonight after a 747 cargo plane crashed near an Essex village shortly after takeoff. It's believed that the 4 people on the Korean plane died when it came down in Woodlands and exploded in a huge fireball. Damon Green has this report.
This is all that's left of the cargo jet that crashed on its way out of Stansted, a trail of wreckage scattered through a mile of farmland and woodland. Chunks of fuselage, pieces of jet engine, fragments of cargo, all smoking where they hit the ground and burst into flame. For the people who live in this corner of Essex, it's a miracle that more lives weren't lost on the ground.
Yeah, it was coming down towards our house on its side, and the lights were still flashing, and the headlights on the plane were lighting up the ground and all our fields, and it was making a really loud screeching noise, like really bad banging noise, and then it just hit the ground. And as soon as it hit the ground, like the flames went up like a nuclear bomb.
It will take days for the hundreds of emergency workers and air crash experts to comb through these piles of debris, made unrecognisable by a terrifying impact and the blaze that followed as the jet's fully laden fuel tanks caught fire.
Where I'm standing used to be a wood. This is Hatfield Forest. Now, where the aircraft hit the ground, there's just a big gouge in the earth. The trees have been flattened, and all we can smell is aircraft fuel and the smell of burning plastic. It's a truly horrible sight.
The wreckage is horrifying enough as it is, but consider that this site is just a few hundred yards from the busy M11 motorway. The men and women trying to find out how this happened will have to work all night, but it will be longer before the pieces of this horrible jigsaw can be put together. This is Damon Green for London Tonight.
For the very latest, we can cross to Richard Gaisford, who's at Stansted Airport. Richard, was there a Mayday message broadcast from the plane?
Well, Katie, despite it being more than 4 hours now since the crash, we're still no clearer as to whether there was a distress call from the cockpit. Any transmissions from the pilot to the tower would have been recorded. Air accident investigators are looking at that now, and we will soon know, I'm sure, whether a Mayday was broadcast or not.
And what have the emergency services found so far?
Well, I've been standing at the edge of the crater that's been formed by this huge explosion. I have to say there's lots of wreckage, lots of small pieces spread over a very wide area indeed. So far, though, they have found one body, one of the 4 crew. They've also found the grim discovery of some body parts. Now, like any other plane, this has 2 black boxes, 2 data recorders. One of those has been discovered too. The search for the other will continue through the night, although the weather and the darkness doesn't help. A full-scale search will be started tomorrow at daylight.
Now, we've been hearing about a possible chemical cargo, Richard. Do they know what was on board?
Well, they're still not exactly sure. They're looking through the manifold that's been faxed over to them from Korean Airlines. What we've seen on the ground is computer software, some toys, some material. There was talk of some low-quality explosives on board. We're still not sure as to what happened. Of course, the fuel was the thing that really went up.
This will have clearly caused chaos at Stansted. What's the effect been on flights?
Well, as you can see, no planes are moving here tonight. They won't do because of the air accident investigation. At the moment, they're saying maybe flights tomorrow. Call ahead if you're actually planning to travel from this airport tomorrow. 44 flights were diverted from here tonight, and it is going to have quite a knock-on on this fairly busy time coming up to the Christmas holiday season. Back to you, Katie.
Richard Gaisford at Stansted Airport, thank you very much indeed. In other news, Two haulage firm bosses who were given suspended sentences after one of their lorry drivers fell asleep at the wheel, causing a fatal crash, could receive tougher punishments. The brother and sister, Stephen and Julie Bowles, were found guilty of manslaughter after overworking the driver, Andrew Cox, before the crash on the M25 in Essex 2 years ago. 2 motorists died. The case may now be referred to the Court of Appeal. David Copeland, the man accused of carrying out a nail bombing campaign in London, claims that he's on hunger strike in Broadmoor. He's charged with the murders of 3 people in the blast at the Admiral Duncan pub in Soho. He's also accused of carrying out bomb attacks in Brixton and Brick Lane. Officials at Broadmoor deny Copeland's claims that he's not eating. The final station on the Jubilee Line extension has been opened. The Minister for London, Keith Hill, declared Westminster Station ready for business before welcoming its first arrival. The station provides a link between the District and Circle lines and the new Jubilee Line platforms, as well as providing the foundation for the new parliamentary building above. A newborn baby from Greenwich will be the youngest of the 10,000 guests at the grand opening of the Dome next week. Lorraine Douglas and her husband have been allowed to bring along their daughter Eleanor, who will be just 6 weeks old on New Year's Eve. Mrs Douglas, who's the chair of Greenwich Women's Centre, was nominated by the council to attend the opening ceremony before she became pregnant.
I'm a bit concerned about whether it'll be too noisy for her, and if it is, then, you know, we might have to leave early, but generally she seems to be quite happy with hustle and bustle and seems to sleep through everything, so I think she'll be fine. So long as she's getting plenty of cuddles, which is the main thing, she's quite happy.
That's it. We're back early in the morning with news of that crash in Stansted. Good night.
Carlton Weather is sponsored by Amarada, the energy company.
Good evening. There may be some rain rattling your window in the next couple of hours. Eventually it will clear up from the west, turning quite chilly as well. Temperatures as low as 3 Celsius by morning. So a coolish start, but a bright and breezy one. We should all see some sunshine for a change, and it will stay dry through the morning. The cloud will slowly build up, but unlike today, it should stay dry right the way through till dusk. Temperatures not bad, 9 or 10. 10 is 50 Fahrenheit. But with that wind strengthening all the while, it's not going to feel all that warm. As far as Christmas Eve is concerned, it's going downhill again. A lot of rain around, especially to the south of London, and some very strong winds as well. That's about it from me. I'll leave you with tomorrow's weather summary. Good night.
For a more detailed 5-day outlook, call Weather Update, sponsored by Amarada.